Welcome back to the I Am More Than podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Wessel. I'm a former Miss Arizona USA, professional model, and founder of More Than Inc. One of our company pillars is mental health, and since May is Mental Health Awareness Month, we wanted to chat with women who are transparent about their journeys in hopes of educating, inspiring, and relating to our audience. This week's guest is not only a mental health advocate, but a pop culture expert, a tech lover, an entrepreneur, and a virtual BFF to over 300,000 people. After losing her best friend to depression, she's dedicated her career to bringing awareness to mental health in hopes of making anyone who is struggling feel less alone. In this episode, we're talking about how she turned her wounds into wisdom, the lessons she learned through therapy, the importance of taking risks, and how she's creating a life she loves. There's so much good advice in this episode, and I'm really excited for you to get to know the one and only Mandy Ansari. Welcome to the I Am More Than podcast, Mandy. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored. I love everything that you stand for. The name is just killer. I mean, I'm super stoked to be here.
Thank you so much. And you and I actually had the privilege of meeting each other in person briefly at an event in New York. I feel like that was right before this whole pandemic hit.
Totally
early March.
Yeah, it was like one of the last really big crowded things I have done since we've been on lockdown. And honestly, I was actually talking to our mutual friend who introduced us yesterday, Carolyn, who's also been on this podcast before.
Oh, yeah, she's
amazing. But I was texting her yesterday because I saw a memory pop up. And it was us in a crowded bar trying to get drinks. And she's like, can you even believe that we were in a place, like a small cramped quarter with a bunch of people fighting for our spot at the bar? And I cannot wait for that day where we are shoved up once against each other and in a crowded space where we're like upset we can't find a seat because there's too many people.
I'm with you.
Seems like a fantasy, like being around people. I can't wait.
I know, right? Especially because you're such an extrovert. I'm sure you're like ready to be around all the people.
I'm like an extroverted extrovert, and I am solo quarantined in New York City, and I just miss people. I mean, I'll sit by the window for hours and just like, 4 people pass by, and I'm like, hi.
Hi, you want to talk? You want to be friends? Well, I think your personality like drew me to you right away because when we started talking, it was like I felt like I knew you. It was just like you're such a girl's girl and you had such a positive energy about you that when we left that event, I remember looking at you on Instagram and being like, oh my God, this girl literally is a virtual best friend to 300,000 people. Like you're amazing and what you've created is really amazing. And I found it awesome that you were that exact same person in person than you are online. So I really admire you for that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think, it's really important for me to be very much the same anywhere I am. And I really believe that, technology and social media, podcasts, they're all just an extension of us. They're a way to amplify what's already happening or whatever our message or our why is. And so I don't really change who I am for, for wherever I am, whether it's on a phone call with a family member or, in a caption to strangers on the internet or not so strangers. But you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like I don't have to change for a platform. It's just, and it's basically a bullhorn, right? Where I'm reaching different people. So
I love it. And I'm so fascinated by your story because, like I said, we got to know each other briefly in person and instantly I was like, this girl's got a story. Like she's lived some life. So I want to dive into that because selfishly, there's so much more I want to know about you. So where are you from? How'd you grow up? Let's start from the beginning.
Of course. Yeah. So I am Persian and I was born in France. That's a whole nother podcast in itself. But we moved to America when I was about 3 years old. And this has been home ever since. I grew up in California in the Bay Area and I lived there until I moved to New York 2 years ago. Most of my family lives in the Bay Area. I have a really big, close family and network there. And I just decided to pick up and move to New York and I've never looked back. I do miss my family, obviously, especially in quarantine, just like not being able to pop over and go see them or just feeling like you're constricted in your ability to move around. But it just kind of my life culminated into a move to New York at 33 and I'm about to be 35 next week.
Oh my gosh, happy early birthday.
Thank you.
But that's quite the jump for you to pick up from somewhere you had never really left, then start an entirely new life on the opposite side of the
Yeah,
country.
it's so funny. I spent most of my 20s in relationships or jobs that I just never saw myself leaving, that I really enjoyed, I really liked, and I felt like I had roots planted. I had always, dreamed of studying abroad. I was really young when I went to college. I was only 16, so I was really, really young.
Wow.
And I wasn't, my parents were like, you're not allowed to go anywhere. You know what I mean? And it kind of doesn't make sense to like travel abroad. You can't do anything actually. And like none of my peers, I wouldn't have been on the same page as my peers. So I
Yeah.
never really studied abroad. And then I just dove headfirst into my career, into different jobs. And I just always dreamed of, moving to New York or just doing something different and kind of getting out there and exploring. But it didn't feel like that door was ever open. And then finally I was at a job that I had been at for 5 years. I felt like my time was coming to kind of move forward. The company had grown a lot in really amazing ways. And so I kind of felt like I was, ready to try something new. And at the same time, I had found myself single for the first time in years. And so I was like, you know what? I think I'm just going to do this. And I was at a place where I have a blog and that was really starting to take off. And I was realizing I didn't have the time anymore to be able to give all of myself to my blog, all of myself to my full-time job, which was also really demanding, and realized, if I were to invest a little bit more into my own business, I think I can really do this full time. So everything kind of fell into place. And I had a couple different brands that I was working with at the time, still am with Bumble, and doing content creation for a couple of different agencies. And I was like, I think I can pull this off. And so I sat
Wow.
down, kind of like charted everything out, and I was like, I'm just going to do it. And it's so funny because when you make a decision to do something, put that out in the universe, everything just fell according to plan. All the puzzle pieces came together, and it just worked out. And
That's
it's so
amazing.
funny. One of my favorite quotes is, sometimes not getting what you want is a wonderful stroke of luck.
Oh,
And
that's
it's
good.
so good. And also, rejection is redirection. And I would say the last 4 years of my life have been really dramatic. We're finally in this place where I feel like, and especially like with this quarantine bit, I'm like, I feel like I'm finally out of that wilderness season. Like I feel
Wow.
like I've finally, like, I've done my time. And of course, life is a roller coaster and there are ups and downs. I'm not saying that by any means I'm out of the woods. We always have ups and downs in life, but I just had a really hard 4 years. I ended a 5 year relationship. My best friend, who my blog is all about, it's dedicated to her. And that's really when she passed away, was when I put everything into, making this happen, and honoring her memory, and, keeping her alive. And my passion is suicide prevention. And that's how she passed. She passed, and that relationship ended within a couple of, months, if not weeks of each other.
Wow.
And so my life just really was seeing a lot of transition. And it is interesting because while there are some things like a passing, especially of someone so young, that you wish didn't happen. And of course, I wish that didn't happen. But there's so many things during the last 4 years where I felt like, things aren't going my way, or I'm not catching a break. And, I would have close friends even be like, I just feel like it's one thing after the other. And I'm so sorry. It's like, you can't catch a break. And I don't understand why. And I really was in the thick of it that way. And it's so interesting because looking back, if if things didn't work out the way that they did, I wouldn't be where I am today. And I'm really in the middle of building a life that I feel really happy about. So it's
Wow.
just wild. And I would say, like, if anybody is in a place in their life right now where they're feeling discouraged, where they're feeling like they can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, which I assume in, quarantine, there's so many people who have been laid off, money, employment, that's just a whole thing that everyone's dealing with right now. Of course, there's health, and so many people's health have been compromised, and there's so much grief associated with that. I'm constantly seeing just really heartbreaking stories of people losing lives, loved ones, and, businesses, which can sometimes be like our loved one, right?
Yeah,
And so I just
totally.
know that, if there's a time, if you're feeling really down right now, it's so hard in the moment to believe that it gets better, but it always gets better. And there is just so much that we learn in that wilderness period that draws us, to the well in the desert at the end that you need to just find some reprieve at. So if
Oh,
you're
yeah.
listening, I just want you to know things will turn around for you and you will be able to make sense of it all soon enough.
Amen. And I think it's really cool. I didn't even know that much of your story. And the fact that you turned the mess of what was the last 4 years really into your message, and you're living out now all these things that I'm sure kind of seemed unattainable 4 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, this
And
is not even what I thought for myself, that I'd be able to live without roommates in New York City in a neighborhood that I always wanted to be in, and I just thought was so far from attainable. And again, by no means is my life perfect. I have lots. There have been many days in quarantine where I've been like, "Oh my gosh, I'm about to be 35. Am I ever going to have children? Is marriage even in the cards for me?" Things that I had like. I'm just like, having this existential crisis in quarantine. And so that stuff doesn't go away. But I do feel like, I was actually thinking about this, like solo isolation, if this was going to happen to me 3 or 4 years ago, even 2 years ago, I'm not sure if I could handle it. Like I feel like I have all the tools I need now to be able to survive. And it's so interesting because I don't think I would have had them before. And so it's
that's
even
so
just looking
interesting.
at that, being like, okay, I'm able to, turn my wounds into wisdom, which is something I always say. Like, I actually enjoy being alone now. And that's something, as an extrovert, you mentioned, like, that's not something I liked before. If I was alone for 3 or 4 hours at a time, I'd be like, okay, I'm ready to see people. And
Yeah.
it's been, obviously like self care, self love has been trending, right? But truly, there's something to be said about that, because I have learned to love the silence of my own company the last couple of years in a really real way. And I'm kind of seeing that comfort and that confidence that did not exist in me before, now in quarantine, where I'm like, oh yeah, like I can handle being alone. I like being alone,
Wow.
And
That's
it just
really, really
blows me
powerful.
away. It really blows me away because I am not this person that would be able to be alone for this long.
Yeah, and I'm sure that you've probably implemented a lot of things gradually in your life over the last 4 years that have prepared you for a time like this. So I want to go into your mindset 4 years ago. You had just lost your best friend.
Yeah.
What was going on in your life during that time? What was your mental health shift after losing her?
Yeah, it's so interesting because we lived together for a while too, and she was very open about her struggles with lifelong depression, with bipolar, and like the person that I was dating also was very open about his issues with anxiety and depression. And I've always been just an eternal optimist, and I'd be like, oh, let's just pray, or let's do this, or like, let's go for a hike, or read this positive book, and we'll be fine. And I just really did not have an understanding of the depths and the seriousness of mental health, and of, it's interesting too, because I studied behavioral studies and I knew all about this stuff scientifically, but it's like how they say, like, book smart versus street smarts. Like, there's a huge
Totally.
thing. Like, you can know something theoretically, but then if you haven't had real life experience, it's hard to know what to do. And so it's interesting because when I lost them, that's when the first time I went to a therapy appointment. The first time
Wow.
I was like, I was at rock bottom, and I was just like, I need something to give me peace. Anything I can do, I need to seek out, because I'm so lost and I'm so depleted. I really truly felt like I had nothing in me to give. And I was like, anything that will help me make sense of this situation, anything that will make me feel better, I will do it. And that's kind of when I started my journey with therapy. And it's really interesting because I started the blog. I had the blog, but I wasn't doing anything with it. It really was a place where I was putting together travel lists and, restaurant recommendations and things like that people would always ask me for. Like, hey, I'm going on a trip to here or there because I love travel and I love food. Do you have recommendations? And so instead of sending them these piecemeal emails, I was like, oh, I'll just put them on this website and people can just, access the link when they need to. But it wasn't until she passed that I was like, you know what? She loved the internet. She would send me no less than like 30 inspirational quotes, funny memes, videos, at that time, Vine, a day. And so when she passed, I was like, how can I help normalize the conversation around depression and anxiety? And, you know, people don't know, and this is my big thing, is I think a lot of us don't realize stress can lead to anxiety. Anxiety can lead to depression. And suddenly we're on this slippery slope where we didn't realize that we were going into a really dark place that we now can't climb out of. And I think the reason why we do that, I really believe that the cause of depression is hopelessness and loneliness. It's when we feel like no one can relate to us. No one has been where we've been. We are completely alone in this, that we really get into the core of those depressed feelings. And so that's kind of where it came along of, if I share, and at that time and still, people talk a lot about social media being the highlight reel. We're only sharing, at that time I was 31. I had just gotten out of a relationship. I felt like, nothing in my life was ready to be praised except for my career at the time. And so I was like, if I start sharing the bad days just as much as I share the good days, somebody's going to feel less alone. And that's going to inspire
Wow.
somebody to feel, be more authentic about where they're at, be more real about how they're really doing. And I just felt like there was this gap. And it really, my friend who passed away, her name's Alicia. Alicia a lot would be like, she was just a beautiful, colorful person that really chased happiness extremely hard. And I think that's one of the things that we are so quick to judge and write off about someone who has depression or someone who is suicidal or commits suicide is we think, oh, they must have looked suicidal. The thing is, there's no look of depression. There's no look of suicide. And we've seen that, with Robin Williams, with Kate Spade, these people who are so colorful and add so much joy to the world. Anthony Bourdain, like depression doesn't have a look. Suicide doesn't
Yeah.
have a look. It's a mask that we're not seeing beyond. And my friend Alicia would send me, she was really great at celebrating others, like she was really great at being happy for others and celebrating others. And if you were, if something good happened to me, she felt the joy like it was her own joy. And she would send me, pictures of people like, oh my gosh, this person just got engaged. This person just got married. Oh, this person just had kids. Like, oh, they got promoted at their job. They're doing so well. And I started realizing, comparison really is the thief of joy. And when we're only seeing the happy moments of someone's life, it isn't actually great for our mental health if we're in this place where we're only thinking their life's picture perfect. And then we see all of ourselves and we see that we're not always perfect. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of where I was like, the thought for virtual BFF is you have a BFF and you know everything that's going on in their life. If they're having marital problems, if they're having, all their childhood traumas, issues they're having, with their in-laws, all of that about your BFF, right? And even if they don't tell you right away, you know them well enough to be like, hey, something's going on. Tell me what's up. And so it was really that, I was like, I want to be like the same BFF that she was to me and I was to her, to more people so that they can just be empowered to be more honest about where they're at, and in that normalize the discussion around mental health, the discussion around, I love your podcast name because it's, that we are more than enough as we are, you know what I mean? And I
Absolutely.
do think social media can sometimes cloud that vision and that we don't feel that way.
It absolutely can. And I think that you normalizing mental health and being able to talk about it in such a public way makes people feel like, oh my gosh, if she can talk about it, then maybe what I'm experiencing isn't so foreign. Maybe what I'm
Yeah.
experiencing, other people can relate to. And I
We
think that we're
all just want to be
finally,
understood. We all just want to
exactly.
be like, feel like we're not alone in something. And I feel like we have the power as human beings, as people now that are so heavily leaning on technology for our connections. We're double tapping, we're commenting. Sometimes you might not even have a conversation with a close friend or a family member, but you feel so connected because you're watching their stories, you're seeing their posts, but really like you're not, like sometimes technology really is our only touch point with someone. And I think it's so important for us to just really choose to be, more than honest about where we're at.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head with that one because I think that, like you said, mental health doesn't have a look. Suicide doesn't have a look. And although it's not a comfortable conversation with a lot of people, I think it's important to make people aware that just because you have a friend or you are somebody that is very colorful and full of life, but secretly battling all these things, doesn't mean that you have to be hopeless. You can reach out to other people, and more people than you even realize can identify with you.
and can help you
Absolutely.
through that journey together. But if you don't ever allow yourself to be vulnerable in that position, you're not allowing yourself to get the help that you need.
Completely. And, a lot of times people ask me, like, oh, like the normal back of house business stuff, right? How do you plan your content? How do you write your captions? How do you know what to say? I never know what to say. For me, I know it's, like not everybody has a person that has inspired everything that they're doing, but we all have our why. And I think it's so important to find out what your why is. What is your purpose? Like, I know for you, you are a model and you're bringing realness to that industry. And, that's your why. And I'm sure your why is a lot more complex than that. And I want to hear a lot more about the ins and outs of it. But it's like, we all have our why, right? And
Absolutely.
for
Yeah.
me, it's my why is anything that I'm posting, if Alicia were to read it, would she feel lighter? Would it make her laugh? Would it make her feel more understood? Would it make her feel a sense of hope? Would it make her feel like she can embrace her silliness and not feel so serious in that moment? Like, she really is my North Star for all things that I do online and offline as well. And so I do think it's so important for us to really know, like, what is our purpose? What is our life's work? What is our meaning? What are we trying to achieve? I'm really a goal oriented person in that way. And I've found that, tapping into my why has helped me stay on a steady path.
That's so well said. Because I think that if you're not fueled by something much deeper than the superficial gratifications,
100%.
it's not going to last, whether that's your career or that's social media or it's a relationship or whatever it is, it needs to be built on real authenticity.
And
And I
I
think
would
you've done
say,
such a good job of doing
oh,
that.
thank you. No, and I would say, I mean, I don't know enough about the modeling industry, but I'd love to ask you, like, is there an area where you've seen people who maybe don't have that why solidified, where they could have everything that looks on the outside, like they'll be successful in the industry, but they're lacking that why, that drive that's propelling them forward?
Absolutely. And I think I saw it so vividly once I moved to New York, because I think that a lot of people's why is because they wanted the glitz and the glam of the industry and thought that the validation would be enough to fuel them.
Yeah.
Where no validation is ever going to fuel you if you're not at peace with yourself. If you don't know your own worth, and if you dictate how you feel about yourself depending on another person's point of view or another person's opinion of you, you're never going to really be at peace. And I think that I saw that everywhere in the industry, where it was like, no, we gotta, like, there has to be something deeper here. You have to be working in this career for something deeper. And if you don't have that, that's why so many people burn out so quickly. And I think that's for every industry,
Absolutely. I'm Middle Eastern, and it's like there's jokes that, every Middle Eastern parent wants their child to be a doctor. And I know a lot of doctors where they only did it because that's socially and culturally acceptable. Like, their parents told them, this is what you're going to be and this is what you're going to do. And so that's just the path they were on. And then they either drop out of medical school, or they just don't have that why, and they're not passionate about it,
Yeah.
or they're depressed because they hate their job.
Totally. And I think a lot of people get to that position where they don't view their job as having a direct impact on their overall happiness, where it's like we spend more than half of our life in our work. If you're doing your job day to day just to get through the day, it's not sustainable. And one day you're going to wake up and be like, what have I been doing for 20 years?
Totally.
Like, I need to fuel myself. And it sounds like you had a really great career back in San Francisco before you kind of got up and redirected your path. And what was it for you that made you realize, like, okay, I don't want to continue doing this for 20 years. I want to step out and try something new.
It's funny, I've had a lot of those moments in my career. So because I started school so young, I just went to a lot of school. I did a lot of schooling and I went to a lot of school. And so I started out with a journalism degree, journalism and advertising, and moved towards education because that was something that I also then loved. And I double majored in that. I got my teaching credential. I got my master's in
Wow.
behavioral studies. I became really passionate about psychology and all of that, and specifically in children and counseling and broken homes, learning disabilities, all of that. And then
Wow.
from there, I moved on to marketing. I was like, I want to get back to that journalism advertising side of things that I loved. And if I stay in education, I'm just going to retire in this industry and never do anything else. And so I was like, I think I want to pivot. And I was living in the Bay Area, which is like the hub of all startups and tech and ideas. And so I had started a business that kind of brought together all of my loves. It was education based, but with a heavy impact on technology and implementing basically a lot of marketing strategy in this. And so that company did really well. And then I eventually sold it. I've just always been a serial entrepreneur. Like I just
Wow.
have always had a trillion ideas, and I make them happen, and then I kind of move on to the next thing.
That's amazing.
But it's so funny because I did feel that and technology has always been a big passion of mine and an interest and something that I was just good at. It's interesting because my dad really nailed everything about technology into my head, and I didn't want to be involved in technology because it's what he did. It was his thing. I kind of wanted to go and be more abstract and do my own thing. And you have to remember back then, technology meant you're an engineer, you're a programmer. It wasn't very creative. It wasn't very relational. And I'm very relational, and so this is before social media, before all of that. So I was like, no, that's not for me. But because it was something I was good at, I constantly just, had a hand in it. And I would make websites for friends. When social media became a thing, I had like a little blog on LiveJournal and then on Zanga. Like I was always the first to be on one of those tech platforms. Like I just loved it. And so when social media became, was born and started becoming a thing, I would, volunteer at, for example, a homeless shelter and be like, hey, I noticed you guys don't have like a Facebook business page. Can I make one for you? And they'd be like, yeah, sure. Because nobody cared about social media. They didn't understand what it was. Or like
Yeah.
I'd be working at a company and be like, hey, I noticed like there's no Twitter or we don't have this, can I make it? And they'd be like, sure. Like, we don't care. Nobody even looks at
Yeah.
that. Nobody cares. And
Wow.
so it was something that, right? It's such a different time.
Like,
That I
you
just
were ahead of the
always
game.
yeah, I just loved, and I do think, it does bring together my love for psychology, my love for advertising, like all of it, it kind of comes together because again, I don't believe social media, like people will be like, how are you good at, like, how do you become good at social media? I'm like, you just be yourself, and it's just,
Yeah,
it's another platform, for you to be yourself on. And it's interesting
absolutely.
because, so I started doing a lot of speaking engagements, ghostwriting even for authors who wanted to write about digital marketing and write about social media and the power of the internet. And so I just, started really getting involved in doing side projects on that. And then it became an option to be a career move. So like I was working at a company leading all of their like email marketing, and then it would expand and they'd be like, now we're going to do social media. Like it was the first time people were getting roles in those areas. And so I just kind of like, I surfed the waves of, opportunity of like, oh, this sounds fun. I want to try that. I want to explore that. And I just really stayed curious, and I think one of the biggest things that my mom always would say is, okay, so you try something and you're not great at it. Okay, so you go back to something else. It's not like you have nothing to fall back on. Like you'll go to the last job that you had, or you'll go to a different career. Like if you try it and it doesn't work, that's fine. You just move on to what did work. And
That's great
yeah,
advice.
and she was just like, it's not like, why, what do you have to be scared of? What's the worst that can happen? And I kind of always was like, that's true. I mean, let's say like I do something and it totally fails and I'm not great at it. I can always be a nanny again, or like go be a kindergarten teacher again. Like I always felt like, what's the worst that can happen if I try something new? It's kind of like that quote that's like, what if I fail? And then it's like, oh darling, but what if you don't try? And it's like, that's kind of just been my motto is, okay, if I'm not good at this, I'll just redirect. And that's also been like with New York right before I was moving. My mom was like, are you scared at all? Like, are you worried that, this might be the wrong decision? And I was like, kind of, like, it's a huge move and I've never been away from my family. And, what if it's just like a total waste of time? And she was like, big deal. You stay there for a year and come back. Like, what's the big deal? And so it's always kind of been my motto is like, what's the worst that can happen? And
Oh,
kind
I
of
love
figuring out
that
like what's
perspective.
the worst case scenario and then reverse engineering that and being like, okay, this is the worst thing that could happen. How would I get myself out of that hole? And kind of always thinking that way.
That's such good advice. And I hope people really listen to that because so many people are so scared of failure because it's like, oh my God, if I fail, then what am I going to do? Where it's like, no, if you fail, what are you going to do? Like figure it out step by step so that the worst case scenario really isn't that bad. You'll figure it out. But so many people hold themselves back from ever even trying because they're so scared that they won't be successful.
Totally.
Where I feel like all of the
And that
greatest
makes
things
sense.
come out of just trying.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the, like, there's so many quotes and so much great things about, overcoming fear. And I think that fear is truly what holds us back in so many things, fear of being liked, of disliked, fear of rejection. Like these things can really be crippling. And it's when you actually, the first time I went to a therapist when I lost my friend, I was in just this place where I was like, nothing's going right in my life. Nothing's happening good. Like everything's bad in my life. And she was like, what's the thing that causes you most anxiety? And obviously I had, a lot of issues with abandonment. I felt like, anyone that I would get close to and that I would love would either drop dead or leave. And that's still like, definitely have a struggle with PTSD that's really real. I'm always kind of on the edge of my seat. If somebody calls me instead of texts me, I'm like, what's wrong? Are you okay? I'm always scared. And that's something that I definitely continue to work through. And I think I probably will always have a level of working through that because of just the nature of the trauma. And I'm sure other people who have lost someone, unexpectedly or struggle with as well. But, she really worked with me on like, what's the thing that's keeping you most anxious? And for me at that time, it was, well, I feel like, I just got out of a relationship at 31. I'm never, ever going to have a kid again. And that was the only thing my future's always looked uncertain, but the one thing I've always wanted was to be a mom. And I just want children so bad, and that's just like something I'm very open about. And I even think about kids more than I think about finding, a partner, if that makes sense. Like, it's like the thing for me is like, and then when I back up into a partner, I think, okay, well, will they be a good dad? Is like really the first thing I think of. And so it's interesting because my therapist was like, okay, let's talk about worst case scenarios. Let's say you're not able to conceive naturally. What would you do next? Okay. If you weren't able to do that, what would you do next? And we backed into like 8 worst case scenarios. And at the end of it, we still had a solution. And that's the thing is like, we don't look at life that way of like, even if you fail, back up into it. If you fail, okay, what happens? And how do you still find a solution for that? And I think, sometimes we're so scared that we don't even think that far to the solution.
Yeah, you're so right. And it sounds like therapy really gave you the tools to be able to apply that not only in this aspect of your life, but really in all aspects that I'm sure you can do in your business and in your personal life and everything. Because I think therapy teaches you self-awareness to a whole nother level. That
Absolutely.
Therapy has such a stigma where I am a big advocate in therapy as well. And I think that self-awareness is one of the best things that you can give to yourself. Because if you understand why you are the way you are, then you're able to apply that literally in every aspect of your life, like we were saying. So when you got into therapy, was it, I'm going to start therapy, I'm going to try and deal with this trauma, and then I'm done? Or did you view it like, no, I need to like continuously keep working on myself, continuously keep learning?
It's interesting that you asked because I went to therapy in the beginning for like 6 months, and me and probably all of you listening, like I can talk a mile a minute. And so I remember I got to like 10 therapy sessions and I was like, I have nothing else to talk to this woman about. Like I'd show up to therapy and be like, I have nothing else to say. Like I'm over this.
Yeah.
Why am I
I know that feeling. Like, why am I still talking about this?
Why am I still talking to her? Like, what are we digging at? There's nothing left to dig. And so I stopped going to therapy. And then a couple months later, I was like, yeah, definitely.
Here I am.
And that's actually probably happened 3 different times in the last 4 years where I've kind of stopped, started again, stopped, started again. And it's interesting. I now look at therapy kind of like dating, and sometimes a relationship lasts longer than it should. Sometimes it's, it's just not a right fit and you're going different ways and maybe you've outgrown certain things and it's okay to move on to the next, and but I have realized that it is something that's really important to have in my life. I think one big realization for me is I've always had a really strong support group. I have a big family of friends that, I know are just ride or die for me. And I have them and I have healthy relationships and communication with them. And I think some people see therapy as, oh, well, if you have a support system, you don't need therapy. Why should you go talk to a stranger? And I think actually you should exactly go talk to a stranger because for me, that's my safe space. I can talk
Exactly.
about anything. It's her job to not judge me. It's her job to listen to me, and it's her job to give me unfiltered, really sound advice that's unbiased. And
Absolutely.
it's really been good for me, especially in the journey of being critical with myself and really pushing myself to be the best person I can be, because sometimes the people who love us have a difficult time doing that, or they have a hard time seeing where we've changed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A lot
Yeah.
of
They're
times,
too close.
yeah, and I think, as I personally think the 20s are the hardest years of a person's life. I think we're expected to have everything figured out, and we just don't. It's we're like
Yeah.
we've been
Amen.
and we just don't have it all figured out. And I think it's nice because you are going to outgrow people. You are going to outgrow people, and I think it's really hard in your 20s and early 30s to admit that you are going to outgrow certain relationships. And that's why I think therapy is so important, because you have someone that can kind of walk through everything with you from an outsider's point of view. And I find myself going to my therapist a lot and being like, okay, like, here's what's going on. Where did I go wrong? I know that if I were to go to some of the people closest to me, they just love me so much, they'd take my side regardless.
Yeah.
So sometimes I just want to hear, that honest feedback.
Definitely. And I think you also have a personality similar to me in the aspect that when we are with our close relationships, we can take on what they're going through. That it's
Yeah.
like we're almost their therapist and
Total
taking a
empath.
lot on.
Yeah.
Totally. Where it's like I've sometimes felt like, okay, where do I take my stuff? Because I don't want to overwhelm the people closest to me if I'm going through something, or I don't want to let them know that the baggage they're putting on me is a little bit too heavy. And it was like, okay, where do I go to get my release? And through therapy, I really started to realize that, like, unloading not only just the stuff that I've been told, but all of the deep stuff that I don't have time to actually deal with myself, was so enlightening and improved every other relationship in my life.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the thing, is like, actually, there's a tweet that I saw recently that I absolutely loved, that was about, when you reach, like, just making sure that you're in a place to, like, it's made me not unload on someone, because I felt exactly how you're feeling, where, like, I might just, like, call my cousin and be like, oh my God, today, and just tell her all of this stuff and load it on her, and not maybe know where she's been at that day. And maybe
Yeah.
the things I share with might be really triggering for her. So therapy has helped me become a better listener, and become a better
Oh my
steward
gosh.
of
Yeah.
relationships in my life, where it's like, hey, I really need someone to talk to about this. Let me know when you have space for me to come and talk to you about this, and to share this with you. And, like,
Wow.
before, we live in this culture too, where it's like, oh my God, like, screenshot culture. Like, we have this open, this open line to every person that we know. And sometimes people, they're in the middle of their day, they're going through their own thing, and they don't have the space to hold for you. And I think
Yep.
it's important for us to, I think therapy has really taught me to be more empathetic and where people are at in their own journeys.
Definitely. And I've also noticed that through therapy, I've been able to feel like I'm at peace with the fact that I'm very imperfect.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we're going out, especially on Instagram or on blogs or whatever your public forum is, when you're talking about being so positive, but also feeling like you have something darker inside and not wanting to talk about that, I felt like I could compartmentalize different areas of my life because I could deal with what I needed to deal with at the time and place it needed to be dealt with. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I totally feel you too. And I have a really favorite quote. It's basically the thought of, you can be a masterpiece and a work in progress at the same time. I think we need to have that same grace for us. Like, and it's actually helped me a lot with anyone that has criticism, because I accept their criticism and I'm like, yeah, I'm actually not perfect. I'm not trying to be. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to be real, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's really important, of like, when you are very open about that, people don't really come at you. And if they do
Yeah.
come at you, nothing really sticks, because you're like, my purpose here isn't to hide anything. My purpose isn't to be perfect. My purpose is just to be, and I think it's
Yeah.
really helped me to just be open with the fact that, yeah, this is where I'm at on my journey. And I'm always open to feedback because I know I'm not perfect and I'm not trying to be.
Oh, I really love that. Because I was going to ask too, how do you handle judgment being such a public person? And you're also public about some of the sensitive areas in your
Yeah.
life. How did you create that thick skin that even though people can say things without really knowing you or what you've been through, how do you kind of brush that off or decide if that person deserves more of your energy? Like, how do you
Yeah.
decipher between the two?
It is absolutely a work in progress. And I think it's something that I've come to the conclusion that, it's not something I'm ever going to perfect. I think, it just depends on where you're at in a day. Someone's words might stick a way that they won't on another day, and like, I think there's that TikTok song that's like,
Yeah.
gets stuck in my head. That's like, I'm a boss, I'm a bitch. Like, it's like, sometimes we're
Oh.
like very, we're like, where we're like, I'm woman, hear me roar. Like, who run the world? Like, I got this. I'm a badass. And then there's days where I'm like, I am a fragile bubble that's about to pop, And I think like it just really depends on what mood I'm in, where, what someone says could hurt me or affect me in a certain way. And, I had a very hard time with this in the beginning. And it was something that really hurt me. There's definitely things where I will say, like, whenever I do talk about my friend passing, about Alicia, I'm so sensitive about people not thinking, like, I had somebody once say, like, oh, I feel like you've used her death to basically build a platform and to get ahead in life. And the thing is anyone who knows the relationship with her knows that is the furthest thing from the truth. Like, I would do anything for her to be here and I would give it all up, for that. But I've learned to be, and so sometimes I get insecure about that. I don't want to share too much about her because I'm scared someone's going to come at me. I'm scared someone's going to misconstrue me remembering her as me, just hogging that as an attention like grabber, I guess. And it's absolutely not the case. And so I've just come to a point where I'm like, that's fine. If somebody says that, I can break it down for them. And if somebody's actually concerned that I'm doing that, they will
Totally.
listen. Like, I think that's one obviously that hurts me a lot because it's so near and dear to my heart and it's so far from the truth. But there were times like I've gotten comments about like somebody maybe like 8 months ago commented on one of my pictures and said, I feel like your weight fluctuates so much. And it does. Like, I've lost
Oh my God.
140 pounds over the last 3 years, and sometimes it's a little like
Wow.
right now with, in quarantine, I've gained a little bit of it back. It's the first time in 3 years that the scale has gone up, and it's not much, but to me, I've been trying to get out of my head about that. And so somebody commented, I feel like your weight fluctuates so much. Like, why is that? And I just wrote back and said, it does fluctuate a lot. Like I gain weight
Yeah,
quickly
you
and
own it.
I don't lose it as quickly either, but it's something I constantly am working at. And I have to be really cognizant of what's healthiest for me. But yeah, it does fluctuate. And
Yeah.
I remember just being like, it's so funny because if this person had said this to me before, I would have been really hurt by it, offended by it, and when they said that, I just was like, yeah, you're right. I do fluctuate. Like, okay, facts, and I wasn't even offended by it at all.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just a learning process of
Wow.
like, we need to always put away offense and defense because even now, as I'm telling it to you, it's like, why was I even offended by that ever at all? Like, my weight doesn't define who I am, and if it fluctuates, everybody's weight
Preach.
fluctuates, who cares?
Exactly. We're
But
human
it's,
beings.
things like that yeah, I had, and it's shortly after that, I had had posted a GIF. I was doing a campaign about cooking and I had baked for Thanksgiving. And the person said, as somebody who as somebody who talks about how she's recently lost over 100 pounds, don't you think you should be making a salad instead of baking? And I was
Oh
shook
no.
just at like the audacity because it's like, uh, okay. But then I just wrote back and I was like,
Oh my
I
God.
believe in moderation and I believe in living a happy life. And for me, baking pies around the holidays is something that brings me a lot of joy. And so,
Yeah.
you know, that's what I'm going to do. I believe in living in moderation and that's my life choice, and I think that's the thing is like when you become really comfortable with the choices you make for your own life, other people's opinions doesn't really shake you. It might stop you, and it might make you,
Yeah.
stop in your tracks, think about it, and then either respond or don't, but it shouldn't break you down. And I think that's
That's
where,
really
we need to
powerful.
really work on our mental health and get to a place where we're feeling really confident about the decisions that we make.
Is if you are confident in who you are and the choices you've made and the skin that you're in, it takes a lot to shake that. And I think that maybe that's
For
something
sure.
that comes with age and it comes with experience. And I want to know kind of what has your confidence journey been like to get to this level?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's totally a work in progress, but I've found kind of what works for me. I know that when I move more, when I'm getting my steps in, when I'm doing the things like even just for my mental health, like exercise for me is not about how many calories I burn. It's about getting outside. It's about treating my body with respect. It's about not taking my health for granted. The fact that I have legs, that I have arms that I can move, it makes me feel powerful to move my body. And so like, that is a big part of it. Eating foods that nourish me, that make me feel good about myself. I love a McDonald's hash brown more than anybody you probably know, and curly fries and corn dogs, but if I were to sit around and eat those things constantly, I would not be feeling good. Like literally scientifically, this has nothing to do with calories or weight or carbs, right? It has to do with like there are things
Yeah,
that make you feel good. There are things like, and you'll see it. Let's ditch the scale. Let's talk about skin. Like our skin suffers when we're not drinking enough water,
totally.
when we're not giving it the greens it needs. And so that's kind of how I live is like, what are the things that make me feel good? And I can tell like when I'm not making my sleep a priority, when I'm skipping out on eating a balanced diet, when I'm skipping out on exercise, when I'm missing my therapy appointments, 2 weeks in a row, when I'm not taking the time to, talk to those who I love and respect, that's what, and like making time for loved ones, I start feeling it just have a domino effect across my whole life. And, I'm not feeling my best and therefore I'm not able to walk in confidence.
That's very profound and so true because I think it's all balance. It all makes up who you are. And if one of those things is off, you can absolutely tell that there's an impact, and I do think that
Absolutely.
that comes with age as well, because I think when you're younger, you just think that like, oh, I want to look a certain way. So I need to do X, Y, and Z so I can look that way. Where
Yeah.
it's
And,
like, no, when you start to get older, you realize like, no, I need to feel good. It doesn't just matter how I look.
exactly, exactly. And and we have to remember our brain is a muscle. And so mental health isn't a destination where you arrive. Like if you're not toning and working that muscle out, it's going to loosen up, and so you got to stay tight on your game. And that's why, I joke and I say self-care is trending, but the thing is I'm so happy people are thinking about self-care, like taking a bath. That's something I don't skimp out on. I take like 3 baths a week. I listen to a podcast that I love. I watch YouTube videos regularly on manifestation and meditation. I do breathing exercises. I always talk about there's an app called Happy Not Perfect. And I love it. Download it if you don't have it, Jordan. Happy Not Perfect. It's amazing. And it is a mental health app. It
I
takes
need
you about
to.
5 minutes in the morning. And before I even get into Instagram or my email or my text messages, I open up Happy Not Perfect and I spend 5 minutes in it and I just set the tone for my day. And I've noticed that when I'm doing that, I'm respecting myself. I'm making myself a priority. And it's a very hard for somebody to shake my confidence when I've started my day investing in myself.
Oh, I love that. And I'm such an advocate for morning routines to set yourself up for success. And so I love that
Totally.
that's a big part of your routine. Is there any other things that you have started implementing into daily before quarantine, during quarantine that you feel like has really made a significant impact on your
Yeah.
overall mental health?
Yep. I have a iPhone note. I have a couple of them. I know that like I'm not the type like I switch bags so often. I do all these like it's not practical for me to carry around a journal or a book. And so I kind of have I kind of say like my theory in life is doing the most by doing the least. And I know I'm always going to have my phone with me. And so I don't beat myself up about screen time. I make sure I'm following first of all people that are uplifting. I follow a bunch of Instagram therapists. I follow a bunch of mental health and like positivity, good quotes and good vibe accounts. And I unfollow things that may be the opposite of that or may trigger me in some way, shape, or form. But what I do is I have iPhone notes I have a note for anxiety affirmations. These are ones I found on Pinterest. Like I'll go on Pinterest and I'll do affirmations about body image, affirmations about anxiety, affirmations about, fear, about grief. And I'll make these iPhone notes. And basically, anytime I feel, for me, anxiety really manifests in my chest. I can feel like it's harder for me to breathe. It's like a little heavier. And so immediately when I feel that coming on, I pull out my iPhone note. I go somewhere where I can get a breath of fresh air. If it's, like right now, it would be I would open my window, sit by my window, and I would, read my iPhone note. So like in quarantine, the one that I've been going to so much is anxiety affirmations. And I'll read a couple of them out to you because I pull this up maybe 3 times a day, where the second I feel like, what, and especially during quarantine, it's like so much is out of our control. There's so many things that we can't control. And when I can't control things, my anxiety immediately goes up. And so this is something that I pull up and I read, and it's, I breathe in relaxation, I breathe out tension. And I always do the breathe in for 4, breathe out for 6, and then breathe in for 6, breathe out for 4. That's kind of my rule of
that's
breathing.
good.
Yeah, and then I am capable of solving any problems that face me. I am free of anxiety and I'm living a calm life. I'm ridding my mind of negative thoughts and filling it with positive ones. Anxiety might make me feel uncomfortable, but I am in charge of my mind and my body. I am more and more calm with each deep breath that I take. I am free of anything that weighs me down. I have everything I need for a happy life. The feelings of panic are leaving my body. I am relaxing each part of my body. My mind is clearing and I am in control. My body is calm. All is well in the world. And it's just such a small little thing, but I do those breathing exercises before, during, and after I finish this note. And then I move back on my merry way. And as many times as I need to do it during the day, I do. Rewiring.
Well, you're taking control when you feel like you don't have control.
Yeah. And I did a caption on this recently that you might have seen, but it was, on average, and this is like from a big neuroscience, UCLA neuroscience study, on average, each person has 60 to 80,000 thoughts per day. Out of those 60 to 80,000 thoughts, 70 to 80% of those thoughts are just naturally negative. So that means even your most positive, optimistic person is dealing with about 60% of their thoughts being negative. And how do you replace negativity in your mind? By feeding it positivity so that scale can level out a little bit, so that you can have a decrease in the negative versus the positive. And that's why it is so important to make sure you are listening to things that are inspiring, that you are reading things that are positive, that you're ridding yourself of, I love a good meme more than anyone, but if I'm going to be reading memes all day that are making fun of other people and that are self-deprecating, I'm filling my mind with self-deprecating humor and, putting other people down. And at some point I am what I consume, and so that's the thing is if my mind is already struggling to have, 60 to 70% of my thoughts being negative, it is my job to add positivity there. It's up to us to really own our thoughts and what we feed it, and know that, yes, I'm not going to always be positive. Yeah, I am going to trip myself up and I am going to get scared, but am I doing my best to make sure that I'm equipped when those rough waves come in? Am I doing my best to fill my thoughts with positivity so that I can surf those waves and get through, the rough parts?
And you had said something really interesting earlier just about social media and it being a highlight reel, which I think we hear that all the time, where I think your approach to social media is so inspiring because you know that you have control to make it what you want to be. So follow people that inspire you instead of this comparison culture constantly. So can you kind of elaborate on how you've made social media such a positive part of your life?
Yeah, I think, I actually talked about this yesterday. I saw this girl on TikTok who is diagnosed with cancer and she has to go through chemo during quarantine because of, all of the rules and regulations right now because of COVID. She is in absolute isolation getting her chemo treatments for 3 weeks. And so she's dancing on TikTok every day, learning dances and posting them. and the comments are making her feel less alone. And I saw that and I thought, and they say the internet is a toxic place, and they say social media is toxic. The truth is anything can be toxic when we are feeding it toxicity. So it's your
Amen.
choice. It's your choice what you want to be in the world and what you want to put out there. And I will tell you, like, even in my most negative, horrible times, I could either, put on a mask and not show it off, or you can choose to just be honest about it. And honesty itself is powerful and it's empowering, and it will make other people feel less alone. And that's putting positivity back in the world, even when you're in, dire straits. So for me, it's really just choosing to be open and honest about the good days and about the bad, because I know I'm not the only one who has them. And, I always say a measure of success for me. Yeah, I always say a measure of success for me is how it goes down in my DMs, because I'm talking about suicide. I'm talking about mental health. And I do like to say, like, I use fashion, I use food, I use travel, skincare, beauty, all of that as a gateway drug to get you to follow and to listen to me. And then I slip in, the more serious topics, like, here are 10 ways to be happier today. Here are 15 ways to beat your anxiety, and I kind of slip it in that way because it truly is advice for the modern girl, for the modern person, like, we're all on this road together. And so kind of slipping that in. But the thing is like, when I usually get a lot of my feedback about those more serious topics in my DMs, and that's for nobody else to see but me. So somebody might be like, oh, she only got like 5,000 likes on that photo. It didn't do that well when she talks about depression. Somebody could see that and make that assumption, but I'm not there for them. I'm there for the person that is fighting for happiness, like my friend Alicia was. And if they send me a DM, I've done my job. I'm here to make sure that the person who's having a hard go right now feels a little less alone. So for me, my success metric is, did it go down in my DMs? Did somebody send me a personal DM to talk about that, to share something that they're going through? And, more times out of not, they do. And that to me is where I know, okay, I showed up. I made someone laugh today. I made someone feel heard. I helped someone, work through some of their feelings. And for me, that's how I know, okay, I'm on my way to adding a little bit of positivity to the internet.
And you've done such a good job at that. I think that your whole page is just radiating joy, even though you're talking about the hard things, because it's authentic and it's real and it's genuine. And I'm really proud to know you.
Oh, I feel the same way. And I'm so excited to just continue listening in on the incredible stories that you highlight here.
Thank you. I really appreciate you. And something that I'm trying to implement into the end of our podcast is I started More Than because I feel like we are all so much more than a label that's been placed on us, where a lot of the time a label that's been placed is either something we are hiding behind or something we feel we have to live up to. And I think as women, we're so multifaceted that we can take these quote unquote labels and kind of take charge of them. So for you, what are some labels that you think compile who Mandy is?
Interesting. I think some labels are an extrovert, a people person, someone who's really silly and goofy, somebody who I have, embracing my emotions is something that I've recently done, kind of because I've had a lot of emotions the last couple of years. But I used to be somebody that kind of was an escapist. I would make a joke or do something to kind of shield myself from emotions, from feeling them and sharing them. And so I think that's something like, I'm more than my emotions. I am more than my humor. I am really trying to fight through more than how people see me. I'm more than what you just see on the exterior. I get a lot of times, because I am an optimistic person who is a huge extrovert, people just being like, you seem like you're always happy all the time. And it's like, the truth is I'm more than just happy all the time. There's a lot of highs and lows, but I always try to bring it back.
Yeah, that's so well said. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, Mandy. I think that a lot of people are going to learn a lot from this episode and just get to know the incredible person that you are. So I'm very glad you came on. Thank you so much.
So there you have it. I hope you got just as much out of this episode as I did. Please take a second to rate and review. It means so much. And remember, you are so much more than whatever label's been placed upon you. We'll see you next week.